This is Queued Up, where we amplify the voices of educators with the science, soul, and story shaping education. Today on Queued Up, we have Dr. Luann Purcell, and she is with us, and she's going to be talking about beginning in the classroom and where her journey has taken her in special education. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a delight to be here.
Yeah. So we were just chatting it up before we got started here, and you were telling me that when you started teaching, you were in general education.
That's right. I taught senior English, and it was quite an experience because I was only 19 years old.
19.
I had 3 boys in my class that were older than I was. And I guess maybe that was a little nugget that first started me into the whole idea of special needs. They were not classified in any way, but our curriculum was Macbeth and Greek mythology, grammar, and writing a theme every single week. And these boys were about on the second grade leading level. So I did a learning station for them. And what I was most proud about was that when they walked across the platform and got their diploma, they could read 2 grade levels above and they could fill out a job application.
Nice.
And I realized that, you have to adjust with students.
Yeah. And we talked about also that when you started teaching, we didn't have the Public Law 94-142.
No.
So was that just what you did for students?
Yeah, I think different districts did some work with students. In fact, I had a student in my homeroom that first year I taught who was nonverbal. And it was real, I just loved him, and I didn't know it, but he loved me. I had to have surgery and was out for about 6 weeks. And when I came back, his teacher came down and brought him and said that he missed me so much, he wanted to make something for me.
Oh.
And I still have, this is like 54 years later, the ceramic crab dish that he made for me because he said she was so kind to me.
Oh, wow.
And so, we had some special education, but not like that.
But it just wasn't mandated.
It wasn't mandated. And then when my husband and I moved to Middle Georgia, and that school system also had special education, but again, it wasn't mandated. And also, there were not the rules. Like, I taught there for a year with Georgia history, and back in the day, I had 4 classes of regular students and 1 slow learner class. They were not special education, but they were called slow learners. And after being eaten up, after the first day, I realized they couldn't read the Georgia history book. And so I rewrote the textbook, and I set up a behavior. And so I set up a behavior management plan for the whole class.
Yeah.
I only gave them 3 rules. 1 was to raise their hand when they were going to speak, and 2, not touch others with their hands, and then have a pencil. And I had a big gallon jug on my desk that had pencils, so everybody got that rule.
Yeah.
And then I wrote up on the chalkboard. We still had chalkboards back then.
Yes.
The periods were 55 minutes, and whenever anyone broke a rule, I erased the last number. So on Friday, the highest number was 4, and I took my husband, who was a coach, his stopwatch, and we had record players back then,
Yes.
And so they brought the records. I had veto power, but at 4 minutes, I picked up the needle. But for the rest of the quarter, the lowest amount of numbers that they had was like 47 minutes. So we didn't do any Georgia history on Friday, but we got some quality instruction on Monday through Thursday.
Yeah, and it didn't take them long to figure out, hey, let's pull this together. We get some music.
That's right. That's right. And so that's actually how I got in special education at the end of that year. So this was my second year. So this was 1974, the spring of 74. My principal knocked on the door, and he said, the central office just called, and we're getting this new class for students who have behavior disorders. And since you're the only teacher who's never sent a kid to the office for behavior, we want you to teach it.
You're it.
And with no special education at all.
Wow.
And that's how I got started. And that was before 94-142. And this is where my salvation was. We had a local CEC chapter. And I joined CEC immediately and was a part of that chapter. And our veteran teachers would do make and take workshops. And they really taught me everything I needed to know.
Yeah.
And even though I have a doctorate from the University of Georgia, my leadership skills came from that local chapter. And so
Just rolling up your sleeves and getting in there, right?
yeah, and we didn't have any kind of guidance. So I took index cards and I sat down with my boys because back then, a class of emotional behavior disordered students, 90% of them were boys.
Sure.
And so I would sit down with them and I'd say, okay, what do you think if you changed, you would be more successful in Miss Smith's class? And we would have a discussion and we'd write down about 4 things. And then about every 6 weeks, we'd sit down and say, well, how do you think we're doing on that? And so it just so happened that my district didn't even have maternity leave. This is how long ago that was.
I can't even imagine that. I'm sure
It was illegal.
Yeah.
But they didn't. I had to resign. But my principal loved me so much. He told the person when he hired me, he says, I'll give you a really good recommendation, but you're not going to work here next year. Luann's coming back.
Yeah.
And so, but she told me later because my son was born in 1977, which was when IDEA was implemented. And she took those index cards and was able to write up the IEPs. And,
Wow.
and she told me, she says, wow, it was so easy because everything we needed
Was right there.
was on the index cards.
So you're really at the forefront of when special education started. What kind of changes have you seen throughout the years?
Oh, well, there have been lots of changes, but and some of them were good and some of them weren't so good. But one of the things that I think was immediate in Georgia, we had a really strong State Department, so we had good guidance on IEPs and things of that nature. But the thing was that before 94-142, there was no standardization. So while I did the index cards, the teacher next
Nobody
door
else
did.
Right.
But we all had to do IEPs, and so there was a real need for that kind of thing. And of course, they got really long and everybody complained about the paperwork. But I'll tell you a secret about that. Once I moved into administration, and they had a tweak with the law, and so we were able to change the IEP. So my district was about 30,000, so it was a good-sized district. I took one special education teacher from every school. We had 30 schools. And I said, here are the things that have to be on the IEP.
Yeah.
Here's our IEP. You write the one you want. And and so they wrote an IEP. And you know what? They wrote an IEP that was 3 pages longer than the one we had. I said,
So now you're complaining about the length of it.
I said, wait, you weren't supposed to do one longer. And they said, but Dr. Purcell, this is what we need. This is what we need.
You have to give the roadmap so somebody knows what to do next.
But I think it was 2 things. One, the teachers were the ones who wrote it. And so I told them, I said, well, you're going to have to explain it to the other 200 teachers why it's 3 pages longer. And then the state actually took that one and offered it as an example. But
So they did a nice job.
yeah. So at first, there was a lot of more litigation. We didn't have litigation in our district. I tried to work really hard with parents and come up with other options so that we could work together and certainly use mediation. And things of that nature. And that's one thing that has really changed for the best. I'll give a plug for Cadre, which is a federal program that really provides lots of resources on mediation. And so, but I think in the last 10, 15 years, maybe not in your big metro systems, but in overall, I think that there's more working together and more understanding.
The collaborative piece of that.
A lot more collaboration. And I think that people realize that we're really all on the same team. And I think that's important.
Oh, I am so sorry. It used to be so intimidating to me when an advocate would show up to an IEP meeting. And then I got to thinking, like, I want the best for the child too. So why am I so nervous that an advocate is here? I mean, like, it would be like everybody was whispering, oh, an advocate's coming, an advocate's coming. And after a while, it was like, we're all working towards what's best for the kids. So
right. I think one of the things that bothers teachers and even administrators about that is that we all consider ourselves advocates. And so, we're all advocates. And that's what we have to really look at is how can we meet the needs of the student the best. And you and I have talked about, I have a grandson who
Yes.
has trisomy 13 and has lots of issues. And I thought that I was very empathetic with my families and all, but you still can never really understand the stress and the pressure that the parents go through, the family, not just the parents.
Absolutely.
Me as a
Yeah.
grandmother,
Oh, yeah.
you know, and the 3 children, the siblings, you know, it impacts everything about it, about their life. And while you can empathize with them and try to do the very best you can for them, you really can't understand the kind of stress
Right.
that parents who have severely disabled students are living with on a moment-to-moment basis.
You know, I've always said that when you have a child or a grandchild, it's like taking your heart outside of your body and letting it like just freely roam around, and it changes everything. And you're like, whoa, it's so different when you have that connection. How old is your grandson? 6, you said?
6.
So how do you think your thinking has changed since you were, from an educator perspective and now you're from the family perspective? What's changed?
Well, I've always thought, and you and I talked about this yesterday, since you have you grew up with a brother.
Yes.
Parents are the people who are most involved with their child, and they really should be the teacher to the teacher about how to deal with their students. And we used to always say in an IEP meeting, we would say to the parent, what is the one thing that you would like to see changed in order to make your life better as a family?
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I ever asked that, I remember a parent saying, I just want us to be able to go to McDonald's together without everybody staring at us.
Yeah.
You know, and so we put that in the IEP, and we actually would make trips to McDonald's.
Worked on that.
And work on his vocalizations while we were in that kind of a setting.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you need to, I think I always was aware that the parents knew their child best. And I think that we as a group really tried to meet the needs of the parents and the child. What changed after Samuel is that I never truly understood what the parents were going through
Yeah.
the other hours of the day. And I think that while I would ask what we could do, it was just like isolated events. It wasn't like the total thing of hearing the alarms in the middle of the night when the oxygen level drops too low, you know, and all of those kinds of things. The trips to the emergency room, the pediatric ICU, you know, all of the things. That's different.
Yeah. And they're in a different place than if you've not had that in your life.
Right.
You know, my mom would talk about she hated going to IEP meetings. They didn't call them IEP meetings. It was something different because, you know, we talked yesterday that my brother didn't attend public school because of the law wasn't in effect and he just didn't get to. But they would have these meetings and she hated going. And I think I made it my mission to make sure that parents did love going to the meetings, and we would celebrate their child.
Right.
And I did that from her perspective.
Yeah.
A mom that doesn't want to go to a meeting is a mom who has a lot to worry about.
Right.
You know. Before we continue, this episode is sponsored by Q360 Workforce Solutions. If you're a leader listening, you already know the problem. Q360 helps districts get ahead of the staffing and support gaps. This isn't about looking good on paper, it's about keeping schools steady. All right, back to the conversation.
I think it makes a big difference. I remember when we first started, the rule before IDA in my district was that you could come to public school if you were potty trained. And if you weren't potty trained, you know, teachers weren't going to change diapers. And so that was a big thing. And so then when 94-142 was passed, and everybody came. And I remember, and we took the children at 3, and I remember our first student who was, she was actually 3 years old, and she had a feeding tube. And so I did a request for purchasing order for the food for her.
Yeah.
And and something like Similac or whatever it was that the parent told us that, because it was our responsibility, not the parents, to bring it to the school. So I put it on a purchase order. And the purchasing agent came over to my desk and he said, "What is this?"
Yeah.
I said, "Well, that's food." And he said, "What do you mean that's food?" I said, "Well, we have a student who has a feeding tube and that's what she requires." And then he said, "Well, how do I do that?" I said, "I don't care how you do it, but you got to buy it."
We're going to feed this baby while
Yeah,
he's here.
you got to buy it. And, those things were the things that school systems they never dealt with.
Yeah.
How do you transport a student on oxygen in a school bus? The transportation people says, "We can't do that." I said, "Oh, yeah, you got to,
Yeah.
And so all of those things, it was a kind of a growth and all. And so now a lot of those lessons have been passed.
Yeah.
And so we have different issues now.
For sure.
And we've got a lot of new resources. Technology has just provided so many leaps and bounds.
Oh, yeah. I think back to early in my career, and there's things I would have done differently had I known better. You know better, you do better. And one of the things we did on a field trip, and this was our director that was telling us, we told one student he couldn't attend the field trip unless his mother attended.
Yeah.
Here I am, a sister to a individual with a disability, and that it didn't seem right to me, but I didn't think it was like terribly wrong because he had a medical issue and we didn't want it to be unsafe for him.
Right.
But those are things that, things have changed, and now we know, like, oh, no, we're not going to exclude a child. We're going to figure this out.
Yeah.
Mom gets to have her life, go to her job. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really amazing and it was out of ignorance, I think. We just didn't know.
There was no
all that.
ill intent at all. We were trying to keep him safe. Like, he
Right.
had a true medical condition that we were like, ooh, we don't want to be away from the nurse.
So we had a group of teachers that were just really amazing, who worked with students who were back then, we called it TMR, moderate intellectually disabled now. But they wanted to go to Disney World. And I almost had a heart attack. And I said, "What?" They said, "Yeah, we want to. They worked so hard. We think we can do it." I said, What are you going to do when you get down there and you've got half your kids are nonverbal?"
Yeah.
I said, "You come up with a plan that they will be safe."
Yeah.
And so they did. And, I would have never thought of it. They went to the local hospital and had them make the armbands
Sure.
that had all the information that was needed.
would-
And so when they showed me that, I said, "Yes, you did. You came up with a good plan."
That's
and,
ingenuity.
And so, we'll approve that trip. And of course, some parents did go with them because they just wouldn't have let them go without
What
it.
a great opportunity, though,
yeah.
for those students to get to go on that type of a trip with their peers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was fun.
I love those stories. That makes my heart feel like, okay, we're doing something right when kids, get to participate, and when you've got educators that are jumping over barriers to make it happen.
Yes, I think that's a real key is being able to support those teachers that had those ideas instead of just shutting them down.
Yeah.
As much as I wanted to just shut them down, I thought about
scary.
it and I said, well, no, if they can come up with a plan that I feel they will have those children where they won't get lost,
Yeah.
and we won't know where they are, then I think it'll be okay. And so they did.
That's too cool. What are some barriers that you got to see? I mean, that's one personally, but I'm thinking of the barriers in special education that we've had over the years. What are barriers you've seen just be removed?
Well, I think that we have, through our professional organizations, CASE and through CEC, I think that we've changed the attitude of regular education teachers to some degree. Mm-hmm. I think the partnerships that CASE is very strong and CEC is very strong in working with other associations like the National Association of Secondary School Principals and the National Association of Elementary School Principals, the different organizations and superintendents organization, AASA. We've worked with them for years now, and I think that they realize that they're really a part of the instructional practice and that they need to have more information. And so I think that as special education got to the table,
Yeah.
I think that made a big difference in being able to work with budget, being able to see that everybody needs the professional learning. At one time, all the curricular instruction was just the regular ed teachers, where the special education teachers were teaching those same subjects, but in the special education fit.
Yes.
And so we said, whoa, when you do a professional learning for your teachers, it should be all your teachers,
Yeah.
including your special education teachers. And so I think that we have gradually gotten a lot better at that. And actually, we have principal organizations at the state level as well as the national level that will ask for service, programs and all at their
Yeah.
conferences on budget and on instruction. GCASE has done this amazing program just this year where they noticed that in Georgia, and I may get the terminology all wrong, but we have schools that fall below where they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And what they realized that 90% of the students that were causing that to happen were students with disabilities. And so they did a workshop to really give the schools the tools to bring those special education students up.
Yeah.
In the student outcomes, to improve the student outcomes. And so, they were clamoring at that because they knew they needed to get their school above that level.
And you gave them a tool,
And so they had
put
a
it to
tool,
use,
and they could use it, and they could see the difference. And it was pretty amazing. I've seen some data on some that where they were able to bring the special education students up to the level, if not above the level, where they were supposed to be.
That's exciting that they had that ability to make that happen.
Yeah.
I talked with you yesterday and chatting with you just now. You have such an excitement about it. How do you keep that level of excitement after, how many years have you been in your career?
54.
Okay, so how are you still excited?
Well, I'm sure I sound like a broken record, but it is from my heart. I could not be here today if it were not for CEC and CASE. When I was a teacher, CEC was what gave me the skills to work with those students. And what I learned very early was when a child is failing, it typically is because the instructional process is failing.
Yeah.
And that we blame the students, but I'm not blaming teachers. I'm just saying the instructional process
Just
is
haven't
not
hit it.
It's just not right.
Yeah.
And that when you change that, then that student has a big success. I learned this one time. This student was once I was in the special education program, and he was just horrible. And his mother didn't think that he had any bad behavior. And so I'm sure this was illegal, but I took an old tape recorder, because remember, I'm old as dirt. And so I taped the class, and I thought, I'm going to play this to his mom and let her know what a backside he's been. But the next period was my planning period. And so I sat down and I listened to that tape. And what I found was every one of his behaviors was triggered by my actions.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so I rechanged, I restructured
Let's not send this to mom quite yet.
I restructured, my teaching, and his behavior completely changed. And so sometimes we just grab on to this kid can't learn.
Yeah.
And it may be that we've just not taught it right, and because
How
teaching is not the
insightful,
same.
though.
Well,
You didn't know it at the beginning, but for you to self-reflect and realize, hey, this is not just him. I've got some ownership here.
yeah.
Was that early in your career?
Yes, yeah, that was probably, I don't, it was probably within the first 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, first 5 years. And so then as an administrator, that always colored how I felt about
Yeah.
things when there was a problem. Let's stop and think about what the triggers are.
Yes.
And a lot of times we just get so frustrated, we don't stop to just do that reflection. And
Sure.
so
And I think it's hard in special education sometimes because, it is different than a regular education classroom. And so we don't always have people to observe us that really understand what we're doing. And so I felt like even my observations from my administrators and things, that they weren't great because they didn't really know what I was doing. So I didn't get that feedback. And so I feel like that's a hurdle I would love to overcome. I still think it's something that we struggle with within our system.
Well, there are places where they do that. Yeah, I have a really good friend who got her doctorate at the University of Alabama, and she was a part of a project that was called Bug in the Ear, and it was where the teacher wore a little microphone in their ear, and they were able to hear and see. They had cameras set up in the classroom, and they were able to watch the teacher and see what was going on, and they would just give her prompts in her ear. I would go crazy if somebody was talking in my ear while I was trying to teach, but they were able to say, "Oh, that's a great job with redirecting John.
Yeah.
And you might want to try this with Joe." And it really was quite a program, and they do that in some places now. And
it's just not widespread, I think.
I don't think it's widespread yet.
And we have a lot of instructional coaches in districts across the nation. I mean, that's a pretty standard
Yes.
structure that we have. But the instructional coaches wanted to help me, but they actually struggled because they didn't quite understand my job. So I feel like, you've mentioned connecting to CEC and CASE and things, and I didn't do that in my career early on. And I do think if I would have had more of an experience like you talked about, where you had those mentor teachers that were saying, "Hey, this is our make and take. This is how you do this."
Yeah, I had no degree. They had degrees, and I didn't have a degree in special education. I got one immediately, but not the first day I walked in that classroom. And so if it hadn't have been for those teachers, I wouldn't have known what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that what I learned in my classrooms was better than what they taught me, but I think it's important to have those degrees. I think it's important to have that.
I agree.
And it does give you that feel for learning. I believe that the learning is so important, and I feel like that lifelong learning is so important. And if a teacher feels that way, then it's going to be, it's going to spill over to the students.
Yeah.
And no matter what their level is, if they know that you love learning, and if they know you love teaching,
Yes.
then I think that
So
makes
huge.
Yeah, and I think that makes a difference with the parents too.
Yeah. If you could talk to young, maybe first-year teachers right now, what's advice you would give them?
Connect through CEC. Join CEC. Connect with your local chapter. If you don't have a local chapter, I can tell you how to make a local chapter.
We will make sure that information is on there.
Yeah, because I think that you're absolutely right. Other teachers don't understand what happens in a special education classroom. And there are a lot of schools that there's only one teacher who's a special education teacher. And so you can feel very isolated. And that isolation can really keep you from having that feeling of a team. Just like our keynote speaker this afternoon talked about how, you needed to have a team.
Yeah.
And you needed to have hope. And I think that being a part of your professional organization can provide both of those things. It can give you a way of actually doing stuff. One of the publications that CEC does is called Teaching Exceptional Children.
Yes.
And I know, when I was an administrator, when I was assistant superintendent, and I'd go into the schools, I feel sure that some alien had come and put a little receptor in my body, and all the teachers had another one, and they knew as soon as I was in the building, and they'd pop their head out and say, "Dr. Purcell," and of course they would have some little monkey that they would just put on my back, and so I would go back to my office. I would do an illegal act. I would go through the CEC Teaching Exceptional Children and the table of contents, and I almost always within 2 issues would find an article about what that teacher was complaining about. And so I would go down the copier and copy it,
send it to them,
and I would send it to them, and I would say,
"We won't
Susan,
tell anybody."
I said, "Susan, I think this article is exactly what you were talking about." And then I didn't say I read it. Somebody said, "Well, do you have time to read all those articles?" I said, "No." And they said, "Well, how do you know it was a good article?" I said, "Well, CEC put it out. I knew it was vetted."
Know the resources.
And so, but the point wasn't what was in the article. It was that teacher knew that I had heard her.
Yeah.
And that I
And
had
you
done
connected.
something. I had done something. But as an administrator, if I were not a member of CEC, then I wouldn't have those resources at my fingertips.
Yeah.
And this was 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. And now CEC has all the webinars. They have so
Digital.
many really great things.
all of
But
it.
sometimes that can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
And if you have a local chapter, you can kind of divide those out. And 1 month somebody does this article, and 1 month they do that the webinar.
Yeah.
You know, and kind of break it up.
Spread the love. Yeah.
And, you know, I'm not convinced that it's the content that's so important. It's the fact that you get together with others who are having the same issue.
That community.
And in fact, during the pandemic, there were a couple of the chapters that would have virtual wine parties.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they would just talk about what was going on because they were all so new with the virtual teaching. And, you know, CEC really stepped up with that and gave them all memberships in CEC during the pandemic and really offered them a lot of resources, as did Case with the administrators.
Yeah. Well, you know, you have inspired me today. I'm about 30 years into my career, and I don't know, I didn't think I had 20 more in me, but I think you've inspired me to keep going.
Well, I think that the joy
Yeah.
comes from knowing that you can still impact others, that you can still encourage them, and that you can make a difference by getting them connected to an organization, you know, that has materials, but more importantly, connect with the people.
Yeah.
I think that's just so critical.
Well, I really appreciate your wisdom and you sharing today, and it has been a joy getting to know you, and I think we're going to be lifelong friends.
I hope so.
Well, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Queued Up. Follow and subscribe to stay queued up for what's next.